Welcome to this week's edition of the Redacted Culture Cast. I have on today somebody that I actually haven't had the opportunity to meet in person yet, but this is Drew Wallace, and Drew Wallace does a different type of shooting than most of us are familiar with. So Drew, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Drew Wallace. I'm a professional cowboy man and shooter. And a veteran of the 75th Ranger Regiment, and happy to be on. And anyone could follow me at the Ranger Cowboy on Instagram. That's my main handle. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, Drew. Yeah, we do. We might share a little bit of that, the historicity, or we had the historical account of being in battalion, but that doesn't mean I know a thing about cowboy action shooting. I happen to own a Schofield, but I have no, like you have to learn. Sometimes you have to realize that you actually don't know what you're doing before you can figure out how to do it. So for those who are still listening, this is the Redacted Culture Cast. Thank you very much for supporting us through our channel. And you know where to follow us on social media because you're here. And if you want to support the channel, you can head over to redactedllc.com. That's where you'll find our merch, and we will be seeing you soon. So, Drew, you said professional cowboy. What does that mean?
It's a good question. So the sport that I compete in is called Cowboy Man and Shooting, and it's a Western Speed Equestrian Sport. It's basically, if you think about it, a combination of barrel racing and Western shooting. So single action, lever action, and shotguns. And the way that the sport works is that there's a rider and you're on a horse and you're scored based off of time and accuracy. So you basically sprint across a timer, navigate a course as effectively and fast as you can, shoot 10 targets, and then get back across the timer. That's the sport.
It's always 10 targets? It's just a variation of
yeah.
Okay.
So there's probably about 70 different stages of fire, and they're all different. And they include, barrels or gates. And a stage could last anywhere from 10 seconds to, maybe 20, 25. It all depends on what the course is. But, for instance, you would, run across the timer, shoot 5 targets with one revolver, holster, draw the other revolver, and then shoot the other 5. Always 10 targets. You're always scored on your speed and your accuracy.
Is that accuracy scored by just time added for targets not hit?
Correct, yeah. So if you each missed target is actually a 5-second penalty, so which is a lot. So if and people miss all the time, and so you ultimately want to shoot clean, as it's called. You don't want to miss anything because it's generally pretty tough to win, if with a 5-second penalty added to your time. Particularly when, like, some course, might be only 10 seconds long. And mind you, that some of these courses, there's you can win or lose. I've won or lost sometimes by a 10th, even 100th of a second. So I mean, that's like the Kentucky Derby. He wins by a nose. I mean, that's literally how this game is won. So it's crucial to hit all your targets.
Have you shot any other forms of competition, like USPSA 3-gun?
No, I never really got into 3-gun or any of that.
Okay. Because especially what I've seen of like the top shooters, it can be quite similar in the sense of it's scored in a similar way. It's like time plus penalties is how you're scored, and if you if you have penalties can be acquired for more than just failing to neutralize or missing a target or not engaging at one. You shoot from, if you're outside of a box and you're supposed to shoot inside the box, whatever. But when the top competitors are usually competing for fractions of a second, that makes sense. I can think of that. I can kind of distill that out from a human perspective, thinking about my own body mechanics, but now you've got a horse underneath you. So I imagine that the speed in which you accomplish a course is not entirely up to you per se, except for you are training your own horse. So,
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, and so you can get penalties too for, if you knock over a barrel, that's a penalty, or you don't navigate a course correctly, you don't go through a gate and whatnot. But yeah, to your point, it is very reliant on the horse. But then ultimately, I'm at the point with certain horses that I can just look where I want to go and they go there, just by like subtle shifts in my hips. And to get to that point takes, a lot of practice and rehearsal with your horses. So yeah, I mean, you are relying on the animal a ton. But you obviously got to put in those reps ahead of time before the day of competition, to dial them in. And, I take better care of these horses than I probably even do myself. I've got, electromagnetic therapy, we do chiropractic, they're on all sorts of supplements, they're performance animals.
Alrighty. Yeah. I don't, as we were saying a little bit earlier, I don't really have a much firsthand knowledge with horses in the equine sports, but I've fortunately had the opportunity to learn through family members and some friends. And there's a lot to be romanticized about it, I think. But sometimes it's easy to forget. I don't know if it's easy to forget. I don't even know what it's like to sit on a horse and start shooting. So it's an interesting thing to talk about because, okay, you and I both come from Ranger Battalion. I can say, okay, I can talk to you using cultural context that you and I both know. Like we've both shot an M4. We both know what Battle Drill 1 Alpha is. We both know how to clear a room. But so how would you communicate, and how did you go from Ranger Battalion to competition shooting on horseback?
I mean, so both are good questions. I'll answer the second piece kind of first, is that, when you depart Ranger Battalion, you still have a love of firearms, or at least most do, and I did. And so I was actually out in California at Mike Rahagi's gun range. And, this is like 2016, and I was, shooting ARs, semi-autos, just kind of plinking targets, just because it's what I did and I enjoyed it. And behind me at the time was a horse arena, and there were people in there. They brought their horses in, and I heard shooting. So I literally put my guns down and I walked over and watched these guys basically riding around on horses shooting. And I was like amazed. I was like, what? I was like, what is this? And at the time I actually owned a horse that I was doing some trail riding with, and because I'd grown up, riding a little bit. And the guy out there was a trainer named Kenny Lawson. And I asked him, what is this sport? And he said, this is Cowboy Man and Shooting. And I said, how do you get involved? And he said, well, come take a lesson and find out. And so, literally that's what I did. I mean, I brought my horse to him. He was like, hey, you're going to need to break your horse to gunfire, come out and practice with us. And that was kind of it. It kind of set me on this sort of path of excitement on this new sport, which was like a combination of two things that I really loved, which was firearms and then horses. So, that's kind of how, post-military I got exposed to the sport, which was really just walking over and being friendly and open and humble and being willing to learn, knowing that I wasn't that good at it, because I was terrible. I mean, just in terms of horsemanship and, a whole new set of different firearms that you're exposed to using. I mean, going from, semi-auto and, ARs to basically single action and lever action, there's a lot of carryover, but they are different, weapon systems. So that's kind of answering your second question. It's like how I got exposed to it after the military. And then I think, the first question is, what's it like, I guess I kind of with these animals shooting from a moving platform like this, there's so much transferability from military to this sport. I think that's why I've been pretty successful at it. Is that, again, shooting from a moving platform, you're applying a lot of the same mechanics, training mentality, patience, mindset, all those things that I feel like we learned in Ranger Battalion, I was able to take and apply to something new and something that gave me as much excitement as, operating downrange. Because I know you know what that feels like. And that's what this feels like to me. It's like, it's exciting. There's an adrenaline rush. These big, powerful animals just, riding and shooting. I mean, it's a ton of fun. So I think that answers kind of both questions. But
yeah, the interesting part about it, and this is kind of pulling back from the genre of your Cowboy Man and Shooting, and then back to gun culture as a whole, is in a way so much of gun culture just gets along. Like if we, through similar interests or similar things, right? Like your story of you just go over and talk to them, you more or less just investigated, right? And I've heard that story a number of times from people. Like, how did you get involved in this? How'd you come to become a part of what we call greater gun culture? And then there's another. It's weird because it's like its dark cousin exists in the back room, and I've met plenty of people who their first experiences with, let's just say, our gun culture has been extremely off-putting. Yeah. And one very good example of that is that, like, as much as we like to make jokes about the idea of like the FUD or the I don't know, the curmudgeonly old guy who's gatekeeping or whatever you want to call it, I'm sure we've all had experiences with people like that who view your naivety and interest as not something to be harnessed and like brought into the fold, but rather something to be shunned and criticized, as if you were supposed to come out of the womb with dual 1911s and the full Ranger handbook memorized back and forth.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I will say in general, the gun, if you're in one goal, I mean, my experience going from one gun culture to another, it was I was very well received. And I think that also has to do with this gun culture is predominantly rooted in the Western equine group, which is, again, predominantly a very American-loving, veteran-friendly sort of group of people. And so while my firearms experience was very vast and deep, my horsemanship experience really wasn't. And despite that, they welcomed me kind of with open arms. And, since then I've improved that other skill set, which I think takes, potentially even longer to mature than a firearm skill set, because horses, there's a predictability with firearms, firearm, when you put a set of firearm down on the table, it doesn't move, it's just going to see, a horse is a living, breathing animal that does things of its own and of its own free will. You don't always have control over. So, horsemanship is like this ever evolving sort of learning cycle, whether it be with a new horse or as they age or a different course or a different day. It's like there's a lot of variability. Where sometimes with firearms there isn't as much. But they welcome me.
Good. Yeah, I can understand a little bit of. I think most people can understand that the difference between it being an animate and inanimate object.
Yeah.
And we could say, if anything, even if you believe otherwise, I guarantee you, even if you make a Scar 20S your personality, it has less personality than a horse. So.
Yeah, you're probably right. And so it's been a fun community. I mean, I have enjoyed getting into these Western guns too. I mean, it's just, the sport is exciting and it's invigorating. I mean, it's pretty dangerous too. Like I've come off a couple of times. I've seen a lot of people get hurt, seriously hurt. I mean, you're traveling very fast on a moving animal, doing a lot of different things. So it's dangerous. And it's just been a ton of fun. I mean, getting into all the Western guns again has been eye-opening and a lot of fun.
So combining like the Western guns, and you said the community has a certain, natural and perhaps reinforced like connection to American history. How did getting involved in Cowboy Man and Shooting change your opinion of like the Western and the revolver and how that kind of stuff? Like, what is that like? Because I have a revolver. I've shot revolvers. Many of us have, but that's not the same thing as being like having some sort of attunement to the historicity of not only the sport, but like that American spirit.
I mean, participating in the sport has definitely given me a newfound appreciation for that time period, particularly because it wasn't nothing was easy about it. And nothing is easy about, owning horses, riding horses, taking care of horses. And then in terms of like the firearms, nothing is easy about necessarily operating those as well. I mean, it's, just the idea of single action. I mean, being able to shoot fast. People have this, romanticized like, oh, you're going to just, pull out a 6 and just do a Texas fan and just, twirl guns and things like that. I mean, it's hard. I mean, it's not, you've got to have good just hand mobility, holstering, reholster. I mean, you've got to have good proficiency and technical skill with these guns to be, formidable. So I think, there's, again, like all the Hollywood Westerns romanticize it, but like those guys probably shot a ton and trained a ton, and it's a life that they lived because their life depended on the ability to operate a firearm, quickly.
We're talking about the historical characters, not the actors, unless you're
real people. I mean, and that's the thing is like, again, for anyone who owns horses too understands like the demands of animals, like, and it's it's funny. Someone it's a kind of an interesting sort of historical fact. I think it was that the idea behind inventing the automobile wasn't necessarily because people wanted to go faster. It was finding something to replace the horse, because horses are like, they eat all day. They shit all day. They get sick, they can die, and so there's a lot of maintenance and care that goes into, these animals. So anyone who owns horses and does all the work themselves, they know that like these things take a lot of, time and energy. And that's what life was like back then. You got to take care of all these things. And then the firearm aspect, it's like, these aren't AR, it's not an AR-15. It's not a, Glock 19. It's all single action, holds, 6 rounds. It's like, it's different. It's a tougher life. And so I think that gives me more appreciation for the time period now, having participated in this sport.
You see it in modern competition where the Pareto distribution comes to play, where you have a very extreme disparity in skill. The top 1% is so much better than even like the top 10%, who are still so much better than like the rest of the population, that especially if you're used to watching competition shooting, or let's just even say like in the military, I don't know if they said it to you while you were in bat, but like you're the 1% of the 1%, like 1% of the of American citizens join the Army, and 1% of the people who join the Army even make it into Ranger Battalion. And you're like, okay, well, yeah, but probably 1% of people who join the Army try to go to Ranger Battalion, I'm guessing. I mean, and then, or like you can like distill it down to infantry, or you could try to distill it multiple ways. But in our contemporary world, whether you want to call the global war on terror the rise of special operations, or if that is the way that history interprets this time, you certainly will. You can see that the people who are really, really good at something, like the top athletes in sports, or in our case in battalion, even within battalion, there are people who were just better than everybody else at, say, shooting, or marksmanship at distance, or this, that, and the other. And when you apply that lens, that ability to see that, you've probably shot outside of battalion, you've probably been to the range with at least 1,000 people. I mean, maybe, but your sport being a little different. And the disparity of skill, how does that change your like perception of American history with the firearm? The world sees America as, in many ways, tied to the firearm in its formation, its expanse, the skill level of the cowboy. But I don't think I think I run into the problem where, just since I don't know enough about cowboy action shooting, I don't know how hard or unrealistic certain types of shooting may be in a theatrical sense. And I don't want to, I forget what it's called. There's an effect that goes to say, if I read a story in a newspaper about a subject that I'm familiar with, I can see all the errors. But then if I turn the page and I'm reading an article about something I'm not familiar with, I just take it as fact. So
yeah, I see. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a good point. I mean, the only exposure I had to Cowboy Man and Shooting prior to doing it, like most people, is, watching cowboy westerns, 310 to Yuma, or Unforgiven, or, Magnificent Seven, whatever. Now having done it, I mean, you've got appreciation for how hard it really is. But I guess is the question then, how realistic are those films? Is that kind of what you're asking? I mean,
I guess what I'm looking for is, what do films capture well about your expertise within that form of Americana, and how does the idea of the American West, or the American legend, let's say, look different to you now that you've been involved in the sport for a while? How does all this history look different? And how does like the culture of the maybe the rugged individualist and Americanism look different now that you've had to figure out how difficult it is to shoot from horseback, but then you've also been able to become, let's just say, within context, relatively successful at?
Yeah. I mean, the majority of them, and this is the same thing I've we've probably found with some military films, particularly ones on that cover the the GWAT. They often kind of like they romanticize it and they glorify it. They don't. There isn't much focus on the day in and day out, and not the drudgery of it, but the challenge and the focus and all those things that it takes to be successful in it. Because they're trying to sell a movie, so they want it. They're only going to show the fun parts. I guess if I was to, probably the best way to answer this is the movie Unforgiven, the Clint Eastwood movie, probably does the best job of accurately depicting, in my view, how hard that life was. Meaning, when they come upon Clint Eastwood, he's out in the middle of this field with his wife is dead. He's got a young boy, young daughter, and he's moving pigs around, And then he hasn't shot a gun in 10 years because he gave it all up, and he gets out a single action revolver and he can't even hit a can 10 feet away. It's like that to me is a great depiction of what it's like, because every skill is perishable. So if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. Life back then was extremely challenging. You've got animals that need constant care and health and maintenance. And those are the things that, I do every day. I mean, I dry fire just about every day. I'm taking care of these animals every single day. So I have a real good appreciation for it. Now I've got all the luxuries of modern living. So, that's that. But, so yeah, I think, if there's any one film that it encapsulates, I think what it was like and paints that portrait, it would be that.
All right, so outside of film, and outside of film itself, what about what about the historical setting of the use of the cowboy, or the type of how did the revolver change the world? Might be a good question. It's because what I find interesting about, what I'm kind of trying to explore when it comes to let's just say the Western or the West, is that I recently moved from a Midwestern state to a Western state, and just like anytime you go somewhere, you start to realize that the idea that you had about it is different than the reality of itself. For example, the desert could be pretty chilly, although I've known this for a while. I've known this for the better part of my adult life. But the interesting story and the concept of Americana is very different out here than, let's just say, in the northern reaches of the Midwest, where you had a lot of Eastern European or European influence with the Nordic states, and then the Baltic states. I think you call it that now too. So, it's so interesting to me seeing this attachment to American history, and then sort of a resurgence in trying to actually understand how it works. Because I'm curious on what parts of it made it difficult, but what parts were not nearly as difficult as they're presented.
Yeah. In terms of the firearms, or in terms of just the sport in general?
Both. For example, I do not know what it's like to shoot off of a horse.
Yeah.
What is it? What is so different about shooting off of a horse than shooting in person, and how do you train and practice that? Or not shooting off of a person. I could ride on your shoulders, but that would be weird.
Yeah, right. The first aspect is the horse. It's like getting comfortable on this new mobility platform. That's how I look at it. And with a horse, sometimes it depends on the horse, but we always say it takes about a year to really what's called, quote, come together with a horse. Mm-hmm. Meaning that I'm at the point now with the horses that I have, my 2 competition horses, where if I'm at a walk, a trot, or a lope, I can literally look where I want to go, and I'm not touching anything with my hands. I'm just looking at where I want to go, and they go there. And that comes just from, there's so much just in terms of your body and what they feel. Because again, a horse can feel a fly on its butt. You know what I mean? Like, that's how sensitive some horses are. So
I did not know that.
Yeah, before you even introduce firearms on the horse, it's all about the horse and getting comfortable on the horse and becoming a well-rounded rider. Because, I've seen a ton of people come off and and you want to, ultimately you want the horse to be free. You don't want to be yanking in its mouth. You want the horse to basically, the less you can do to have to guide that horse in a certain direction, the better. It'd be like, it's like, even imagine a human like running through an obstacle course. They're going to run through that. If you just let a person run through the course and navigate it as they feel comfortable, they're going to move better versus someone behind them tugging on them, pulling them one way or the other way. It's like, no, go this way, go that way. It's like, that's not efficient movement. So step one is really like coming together with your horse, spending a lot of time with it, and learning how to ride properly. And then the next is, it's integrating a firearm into the mobility platform. And there's a lot of things to consider because you have targets on your left side of you, right side of you. You could be, you got to think about wind direction, the direction you're going. So, a good example is like a lot of shots you shoot behind you. So like I'll be, say that I'm sprinting towards a target, and this, they're right next to each other, and I'm going to split the two. Well, I'm going to shoot one of them as I'm coming into it, and then as I go by, I'm going to turn and shoot behind me at the other one, because you can't always hit them both at the same. You're not going to shoot them both at the same time, and a lot of times if you're shooting into the wind, you're not going to pop the shot. So you shoot it behind you where the wind would carry your sparks further. So those are like things that you think about, or you begin to think about as you're riding and shooting. And as you get faster, the way that you shoot changes. So yeah, first it's really spending time with that horse, dialing that in. And then next it's like, it's really starts with gun handling off of the horse, It's like, I guess, before you even integrate shooting off the animal, you're doing dry firing, holstering, because you're holstering, you don't want to look down when you're holstering, because if you're looking down, you're not looking where you want to go. And, at that speed, that's a lot of time. So, yeah, step one, coming together with your horse. Step two, dry firing, manipulating the weapons on the ground, practicing holstering on the ground, just moving the firearm back and forth. And then step three, you're getting on the animal and you're actually running a course and just starting to build those good repetitions,
You said it takes about a year to become familiar, become like bonded with the horse in that sense.
A lot of times, yeah.
Yeah, and so, and then in combination with that, your practice with a fight, does that 1 year include like your you said breaking it of gunfire?
Well, no, you can break a horse. Some horses can get broke to gunfire real quick. Some not. Some of them don't even mind it at all. So no, yeah.
Outside of like your Cowboy Man and Shooting, there can oftentimes in any other sport be a very intense focus on gear and equipment. And so you like if you shot USPSA or 3-gun, it's easy to go. You can sometimes get a feel for a person's, let's just say, place in the pecking order, which is not meant to be too derogatory, just by looking at their gear. You'd expect, it's not always the case. Everyone knows it's not universal, or everyone should know. But generally speaking, if a person's got a generally speaking, if a person has a $5,000 race gun, he's probably a more aggressive competitive shooter than somebody who has, say, an entry-level firearm in that class. But when I look at your sport, I recognize that I have no way to tell the difference between good gear and bad gear, or if that has any relation to the shooter. And so I sort of default to trying to see the guy moving rather than look at his stuff.
Yeah.
And how is that different? Like, is there a difference between a good revolver and a bad revolver in make, or are you all using the same stuff pretty much, or does that make the man?
No, I mean, this in general for like single action guns, people are just using, Ruger Vaqueros, Montados, or some of the guys are using Ubertis. And here's the thing: is like there's really only so much you can do to a single action gun. I mean, you can get better hammers on them. You can lighten springs, but again, you can't lighten them too much because then the gun won't fire. It's about it. I mean, it's like you can't, because they're such, I don't call them prehistoric, but they kind of are. There's only so much stuff you can do to them for like a competitive edge.
They've had plenty of time to iron out the kinks. They've had plenty of time to iron out all the little pieces.
Yeah, I think if for people, if they're looking to like see like who has the competitive edge, it's really like you watch the rider, you watch how well they're riding and hitting their targets. And again, because a lot of the gear, for instance, these are open carry holsters. That a lot of them are custom crafted out of leather. Some are factory made, but a lot of them are just handmade. In their chest, a lot of them are chest rigs. Some are hip rigs. People have all sorts of different stuff. In my mind, if I being in this sport, the way that I look at, who's a competitor, I look at how they're riding, how they're taking care of their animals. I look at them too, like how they take care of themselves. Those similar things that you would with at a, USPA match or whatever. Gear isn't as big of a factor as some other professional firearm sports.
The interesting part I find is just how gear has become a substitute, or it's not has become. Gear oftentimes functions as a substitute of trying to figure out where somebody fits in an unestablished hierarchy. Whereas, so if I've been in the competition world for a while, I'm probably going to know who the top 10 people are, or at least the top 10 people in my area. If you're going to be involved in, say, competition shooting, whether it's 2-gun, 3-gun, or USPSA, you're going enough where you're seeing the same people. You know who's typically above you or below you. You kind of have a feeling of that. And then, and so like that hierarchy on the competition field is established over time based on skill and accomplishment and time and athleticism and whatever. But outside of a competition environment, I've been talking with some people on the show before about how in the military you have a rank structure, in the competition world you have a leaderboard, in the citizen aspect you have neither. And so I think sometimes people default to gear. Do you have multicam, or you're wearing this? Do you own that gun? Is it an LBT or whatever? And when it comes to cowboy action shooting, it's foreign enough for me where I don't know what I'm looking at when I'm looking at, say, a good saddle versus a mediocre saddle. I can tell you when one's not maintained because that's pretty straightforward. But I can generally speaking, I think. But so I have to default to watching the guy move, and it's like, does he look awkward when he's drawing from the holster? Does he look awkward when he's got to shoot an oblique angle? Is it? And so those things are. It's an interesting study, and why I was asking you about it. My selfish interest is like, is this a more pure sport? As was kind of the question, where it's not so tainted by people's opinions about equipment.
Yeah, it definitely. Yeah, this sport hasn't been tainted that way. I mean, I think it's it's one of the sports where it's just all about your ability, you know. I mean, good equipment does make a difference. I mean, you know, the right saddle that fits your animal, the right holsters, the right guns. But there's only you can only take that so far. You know, ultimately, it does. You know, I mean, at the high level, most people, everyone has the same stuff. You know.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, you can see a little bit of similarity in the grand scheme of the world. Let's just take three gun. The top competitors in, let's say, what was limited division 5 years ago, almost every single person in that division had, you know, a decent rifle with a decent LPVO, a 2011, which is if you're familiar with those, it's a double stack 1911, usually 9mm, and usually a Benelli shotgun with some exceptions, but there's certainly like a commonality to it. But now, you know, you're only dealing with the equipment for the individual, and in most shooting sports that are let's just say like USPSA and three gun, fitness does have a role, but the question is where and how much, because you can definitely run into people who are not as athletic but who are much better shooters.
Yeah, and there's some of that in this sport too. I mean, you know, there are some people who are not athletic at all who can outride anybody, you know, because, you know, let's be honest, the horse is doing a lot of the work, you know.
Yeah.
You know, they're the ones who are covering the ground. You know, if you know how to ride, move your weight, you know. Now, you know, would that rider be better if they lost, you know, 30, 40 pounds? Probably, you know. But, yeah, same, that carries over to our sport as well.
Okay. So then when it comes to, were you shooting, you said you weren't doing any of this kind of shooting before you got in a battalion.
No.
What fundamentals from battalion transferred over, and how would you, if you saw somebody else getting involved in the sport who didn't have those experiences, how would you communicate that to them?
I think one of the biggest fundamentals was like the ability to acquire a sight picture quickly and clearly. Like, and I feel like that is a skill, just that alone. Where if I'm thinking of just even single action now, when I draw, I can get a sight picture real quick, and I don't hesitate. I just shoot. That's a confidence and something that I think takes time to develop. And I remember that, you know, in battalion, you know, where we're doing, you know, ready up drills or even CQB, you know, it's the ability to pick it up real quick and then engage. That's something that takes practice and rehearsal, and to not, you know, and it is a skill unto itself. So just that gun handling piece, drawing, keeping my workspace pretty tight, which I do. You know, I just, you know, I keep I run kind of a chest rig, so I just pull and from my chest and branch out there, and I always keep coming back here. So I mean, those are the types of things that you learn in the military that definitely transfer over. And so if someone didn't have that experience, and that's why gun handling on the ground is so critical, because it's like, dude, if you can't even, just like in battalion, it's like, you can't do the basics on a flat range, like, don't even bother getting in a helo and trying to shoot from, moving platform. Same thing with Cowboy Man and Shooting. If like you can't demonstrate you can handle these firearms on the ground when you're just standing there, like don't bother getting on a horse. I think that too, that mindset, in battalion we work so much on a flat range, and there's benefits of that, but there's a lot of benefits of doing different stress shoots in different lanes where you're moving, crawling. You've got to do those things, but fundamentals, like there's no escape of that. You gotta put that time in one way or another to push your threshold.
So I don't know if you got this experience when you were in Ranger Battalion, but let me know how far off I sound. There is this idea, I believe in culture, I see this idea that there's this sort of mysticism behind ranger training or combat training or special operations training. And you think, and it's oftentimes portrayed as a combination of like a rite of passage and a transformative, like this metamorphosis where you go into it as a human being and you come out of it as a ranger and you can suddenly do things that other people can't do. And when you're there, and because a story I've told before is I remember I grew up with firearms. I grew up shooting in rural Minnesota. My father had a Mini 14, shoots a 223 out of a box-fed magazine, and it's a semi-automatic function. The first time I shot what you'd say is an M4 was extremely underwhelming. It was just, oh, okay, that's what this is. And up until that point, I had sort of this idea that an M4 was a certain type of gun or an AR-15 was a certain type of gun, and I'd never shot one. And then I shot one, and it wasn't as different in the grand scheme of firearms from a Ruger Mini 14 than I had thought. And now that I've spent a lot of time shooting AR-15s and M4s, a Ruger 15 feels like a very different firearm, whether it's skill sets and motions or your manual of arms per se. So when it comes to the special operations training or Ranger Battalion, the idea of it being some sort of magical training kind of evaporated when you realize it's just getting your body and the connection between your brain and your body to do the things that you need it to do, like diving, sliding, crawling, rolling, running with kit, with a gun, with a piece of equipment, which you're like, well, that doesn't, when you're doing it, it certainly doesn't feel special. You're just like, well, I got to crawl through a lane under barbed wire, because you got to learn how to do it. And you can't teach somebody to crawl. You just got to crawl under the cable. So I don't know if your experience with Ranger Battalion and training and the fundamentals was like that, but it certainly didn't have the magic that I was I had kind of thought of it as from outside. So now when I hear someone who says, oh, he's got, special operations training, I was like, cool. He knows how to be cold, hungry, and drag his body across the dirt.
Yeah, basically. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it wasn't like some magical, experience or, rite of passage type of thing. Yeah, it's like you said, being cold, wet, and hungry. It's like, that's what I remember oftentimes the most. I'll say actually shooting single action and things like that was actually might have felt cooler. Like the first time I shot a lever action gun off of the back of a horse, like dropping the reins and shooting a lever action gun, that actually felt pretty magical. I'll be honest. Like it was scary as hell, and there was just maybe because there was so much nostalgia associated with it. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, Ranger training was, it wasn't the same. It wasn't quite like that.
No, it's in gun culture as a whole, and I think unfortunately we allow some of this to bleed out into maybe contemporary American culture. Is that we sort of idolize this training of the special operations guy or whatever it is, and for those of us who've been there, it can feel a little odd because when now you're walking out of it, it doesn't feel that special.
Yeah.
And the other side of it, I mean, I guess maybe.
Yeah. I mean,
well, I mean, the Army can make anything uncomfortable or anything fun not fun.
Yeah.
When did you go to Ranger School?
2004.
Okay, so I was later than you.
It was awful.
And it was. Did you winter or summer?
Well, I graduated in December. I went through Florida in December, and we went in the water, and it was. I've never been so cold, I think, in my life. It was awful.
And you've always grown up on the East Coast, and you've always lived kind of in the East Coast and warmer climates.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, body shivering, feet physically hurting just because they are so wet and just wrinkled, disgusting. I mean, I think I lost over 30 pounds, in Rangers. It was terrible.
I had the advantage of being like I was already from a very cold part of the country. So a winter class for Ranger School probably didn't have as much of an impact on me as it did other people. But when I look back on it, I know that, when I look back on it, there was this idea of what Ranger School would be like before I got in the military, after I got into battalion, and after I graduated Ranger School, which, for those who are unfamiliar with the timeline of what Ranger Battalion looks like, Ranger School is very different than selection, which at the time was called RIP and then later became RASP. Ranger School, I remember like my time before thinking of it as sort of this like harrowing experience that I have to get ready to, and then getting into battalion and being like, well, Ranger School became getting my tab so I didn't have to get yelled at anymore. And then after Ranger School, it was sort of like, that was the thing. I didn't learn anything amazing there. I just had to do all of this stuff all of the time, like long range patrolling, it is what it is. Yeah,
the biggest takeaway I learned in Ranger School was to withstand misery. It's like that was really it. Not just my own personal like physical hardship, but really also other people. It was like, because not only are you dealing with what you have going on, but more often than not, you have to listen to like basically 20 other dudes bitch about their physical, duress. And that's what it was. It's more of just like a mental exercise and being able to like block things out and tune things out, which is really good in life. And it's also like not as you get older, when people are like, well, why doesn't that bother you? And you're like, well, because I chose for it to not bother me. And, they're like, well, it should bother you. And I'm like, I don't know,
Bummer.
Yeah. Right. I mean, you're like, I guess sorry. You're like, okay. Am I supposed to be upset about that?
Yeah.
You know?
Am I? Is this supposed to make me? Yeah. And you don't want to go to the internet for advice because the answer is yes. You should be angry and find a therapist.
Yeah, right. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
it doesn't.
But
yeah, I mean, I think that's what I learned from Ranger School, and I mean it was a suck fest, but yeah, I think but kind of with this, like what I'm doing now, there is a good amount of like glory in it. Like there's an aspect of like I love learning new skills and trying to be better at something. And to me, the military was all about that too. Like you're always like you're never like you're at the top of your game, but like there was always more to learn, all these new skills to like to take advantage of, or schools to go to. So you're always like evolving and learning, and that's kind of like how this sport is, particularly with the animals. Like you can only shoot a single action gun so fast, and you only need to shoot it so fast. But the combination of that with the animals, because animals are so unpredictable sometimes, like that has made it very engaging. And where it differs from the military is like that some aspect of, I don't say glory too. Like it feels good when you have like an amazing stage out there. And I'm guessing like USPA guys have the same thing where they shoot an amazing stage and they're like, fuck yeah, like I just fucking rock that. And I mean, I have that too. I mean, when I shoot really well, it's very gratifying, and you have those sort of like kind of glory moments, and you win something, and then which is nice. Or you're proud of how far you've come with your horse and whatnot. Whereas in the military, that wasn't like that, and I don't know why. It was just sort of you were very proud of what you did, and nothing would ever change that. But I never found as much. I found immense pride in what I was doing, but I never necessarily felt like, I don't know, let's say glory. Like I didn't. Yeah, I didn't finish it, right? I mean,
I like your story I like your way of use of the phrase glory. Now we're really short on time here because I know you got to go, and I want to speedball, not in the speed. Oh, wow, that means something different after 2020. But I want to cruise through this because I know what you're saying in the sense of like you graduate RIP or Ranger School or selection or something, and you're like, man, that like you're expecting it to be different afterwards, and it's not immediately. Maybe it takes time. Maybe the appreciation is work. And then you hear somebody say, wow, you graduated Ranger School. And you're like, yeah, I mean, I did, but whatever, right? Like, it's not like it was, it's not like it was the most life-defining element for me or college or whatever. And so, yeah, that sense of glory, I think, is a hard one to figure out because I think glory can, the word glory can be burdened with unnecessary connotations. But in that sense, there is something to it about shooting really, really well and seeing, maybe it's not the cheering of the crowd per se, because oftentimes there's not one there, but it's more of I know I did well, and I know that I worked. Doing well required me to work at it.
Yeah.
So
true. Yeah.
Yeah, because you don't. I can say with a certain amount of confidence that it's like there wasn't anything that I practiced to get good at Ranger School. There wasn't anything that I delivered. Right now, in the macro view. Yeah, I mean, as a private in battalion, I practiced how to do an ambush, how to set up an LDA, how to set up this. And I was good at all of the, if you want to even call it fundamentals, I was good enough where I didn't get frostbite, I didn't get infections, I was able to take care of my body. And then in Ranger School, when I found out that there was a bunch of people over here complaining about being hungry, I wouldn't go over there. So I wasn't like, brain focused on saltine crackers and cheese. It was like, oh, they're all talking about food. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to make sure I sort of isolate myself from thinking about food when I'm hungry. So, But I was a sleepy ranger, so oh well. Well, Drew, hey, as we wrap up, thank you for coming on. I know this is a bit of a shorter episode on our end, but I do appreciate passing it on. If anyone listening, since we reached kind of a broader gun culture, if anyone listening would want to get involved in Cowboy Man and Shooting, how would you recommend they do that? And what is the one thing that, as you were learning, you would say, don't do this, do this?
Yeah. I think if anyone does want to get involved in Cowboy Man and Shooting, I mean, the best place, honestly, if anyone wants to reach out to me, they can on Instagram at the Ranger Cowboy, because I get questions and things like that and messages all the time of how to get into this. And generally what I do is I ask, well, where do you live? And then I point them to some various trainers that I know around the country. So that's what I will probably do, is that wherever you live, I know a handful of trainers all over the country who are great and who can kind of show you the ropes so you can crawl, walk, run as you get into the sport. And the biggest thing I would say to do, or to don't do, I mean, don't go it alone. Find a reputable trainer or coach who can help guide you into the sport, because the learning curve is very steep. There's a lot that goes into it. It's not barrel racing where all you need is a horse and a saddle and you run around 3 barrels and you're done. There's a lot more involved in this sport than just that. So I'd say don't go it alone. Find a coach or a trainer who can help you. Okay,
cool. So, well, again, thank you very much for that. I one of these days I'll actually I'd like to actually learn how to shoot from horseback more than just, oh, that was cool. Yeah. But hey, all in due time. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for having this conversation and sort of sharing that side of a gun culture, which is so tied to American history that can so easily get, I'd say, taken for granted.
Yeah.
So
awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure we'll stay in touch. Man. It's good to see you. You're out east, correct?
Yeah, I'm in Massachusetts. Not by choice, but I'm here for a while. But I travel all over the country. We got events everywhere. So.
Oh, I would have not taken that. I was going to make a snide comment about people. There's less likely to find people in your sport in the Northeast, but no, I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah, partially true. Yeah. There's not a ton, but I'm holding I keep the group strong up here.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. And for those of you that are, as we're closing up the show, this is the Redacted Culture Cast. We have guests live Mondays and Wednesdays. It's great to have you on. Thank you for being a part of the conversation. If you want to support the channel, you can head over to redactedllc.com. That's where you'll find our merch, and we have more in the works. So, Drew, take care. We'll talk to you soon. Awesome. And enjoy.